Walk us through the decision to frame and
Okay,
publish
moving on.
the second accuser story the Sunday before an election. Headline: Second campaign staffer accuses GOP congressional candidate Carl DeMaio of sexual harassment. We've gotten to some of this before. I don't want to get too into the weeds into it, but I'm interested in, it used to be that the week before a campaign, kind of like a hands-off thing, not a hands-off thing, that's inaccurate, but it's handled with care. This was a pretty explosive revelation. Walk us through the decision to get that and how you got that in the weeks leading up to it.
Is there any chance before that, I just didn't, before we move on from the Wendy thing, I just want to make sure I get on the record as well. So again, Carl's contention is that he didn't write that email either, right?
Are we back to this again?
Yeah, we are, actually. I mean, is that Carl's contention, that he didn't write that email either?
Yes. That's what he contends, that he didn't write it.
And is that
So
your...
the email came out from his Carl DeMaio account, at the very least. An email came out from his campaign claiming credit for a UT edit, claiming credit for writing a UT editorial.
Well, the thing about the UT editorial is funny. I mean, we know what is true. We know we did not write the UT editorial. That is the most ridiculous thing that I'd ever heard. And then you have an email that says, we wrote it. Well, we know it's not true. You have an email that is, you have another source, and I mean this with respect, but you have another source that says, the editor of the paper that does this. So
why was the campaign taking credit for writing it then to the National Republican Congressional Committee?
Good question.
Why were they trying to take credit for writing it?
Good question.
What's the answer?
Why
were they claiming credit? I mean, I guess.
But we didn't write the editorial.
Would it disturb?
Are you saying that Carl's email was not accurate, or was it that was fabricated?
So was that hacked as well? So somebody, if Carl didn't write that email, claiming that he had written the UT editorial, if he didn't write that, what's the explanation for that email? Was that fabricated? Was that hacked? What's the explanation for that one? I mean, I'm just trying to keep all this stuff straight in my head. What's the what logical explanation could there be? You've got an email with Carl DeMaio's name on it, saying what he said. Apparently, Carl claims he didn't write that email. So if he didn't write that email, who did?
Well, normally I'd say I'm not an IT expert, but with over 10 years in the field, I actually can say that. But what I also know is that we didn't write the editorial. The email says, oh, great, we wrote the editorial. We know it to not be true. So
but it's not
the bigger question is to the media. When you have a story that two sources have both said, well, that can't be right, and one email from a guy with a suspect background saying, oh, this is the case.
So
what is your obligation? To run a story that is obviously
I think the
patently
story
false?
raised questions about the credibility of both people involved. Both people making claims, Bosnich and DeMaio, their credibility at that point was a key factor in figuring all this stuff out. Who's lying, who's not. And that email raised questions about both of their credibility. Like, why would he claim credit for an editorial he didn't write?
And I certainly don't find it beyond the realm of possibility that even if he didn't necessarily write the editorial word for word, that he might want to sort of boast about this to his people, to show, oh, I'm a big guy, I wrote that editorial. So, I mean, even if he didn't technically write it, I don't think that somehow automatically disproves that he would send an email taking credit for writing it. And again, when it's his name on the email, it says Carl DeMaio at carldemaio.com. And now you're saying he didn't write this, just like he didn't write the Kate Lyon email. Again, I'm trying to figure out then who wrote that one. Run me through the possible scenarios where somebody else somehow wrote that email. Was that hacked? Did Bosnich hack that? What happened?
And fabricate the metadata going to
you must have
three different
if Carl didn't write that email, there must be some operating theories amongst you guys about how that email came to be.
Please answer that, and then we'll move on.
I'm not even sure what the question is. I mean,
how does the email exist if Carl didn't write it?
I don't know. I don't know.
And also, I mean,
so you're saying that Carl didn't say, we wrote that? Isn't this awesome? We wrote that? Are you saying that Carl did not write that email?
What I'm saying is, we didn't write the editorial. The UT says we didn't write the editorial.
Not asking about
I know I didn't write the editorial, and no one's been able no one has been able to show this smoking gun where it actually is the editorial that's written.
We're not talking about the editorial, we're talking about the email.
Let me finish. if Todd is saying in some email that whether or not it exists, not important, that the Carl Mail campaign wrote an email, or wrote this editorial, well, then why didn't you produce the editorial that we allegedly wrote?
I'm not talking about the editorial, I'm talking about the email.
That's exactly
Do you want to
right.
answer the email question, yes or no? And then we're going to move on to Claire.
Why would he take credit for an editorial he didn't write?
That is a good question. Why would Carl Mail take credit for it?
There's a million reasons why he might do it.
Okay, well, we have...
Did he write the email?
Did he write the email saying we wrote the editorial?
That's the question that we want to know.
Does Carl say he didn't write the email?
I'm sorry?
Does Carl say, I did not write that email?
What did Carl say?
What was on the-
Let's not, did Carl,
If he said he did not write
do you know if Carl wrote the email?
I was certainly not sitting at his desk when he did or did not write this email.
Do you know?
I don't believe he wrote the email, but I don't know. I don't look at every single email.
But do you know what his position is on this? In other words, do you know whether his position is that he wrote the email or he didn't write the email?
Did you get the email?
Did I get the email that says that we wrote the editor? We some sort of weird spelling thing.
Did you get the email?
No,
No.
I don't think I had. No.
And
You
also,
don't
like,
think, or you did?
Well, let me look. No.
Surely you looked to see if you got it.
well, and also, like, if he didn't have, if
Moving on.
Yeah, let's move on to Claire. This email thing, read Scott's story. You can talk to him after. This is a big 30,000-foot question. You know, how do you decide to tackle a story like that, and how do you do it responsibly before an election?
We're talking about the
The second accuser story.
Yes. So I sort of described already that we had spoken with Justin at least a week before that story ran. He told me what he says happened, and he wasn't willing to put his name on it at that time, so we didn't do the story. Time passed. I kept, checking in with him, and then that weekend before the election, he said, "Okay, you can use my name." And we had I'd had lots of conversations with my editor, Laura Wingard, and Laurie Hearn, the director of iNewsSource, and our news director, KPBS news director, Suzanne Mermian, leading up to it. So everyone was fully up to date on what the story was, and we were all in agreement that unless he uses his name, we're not going to do the story. Within minutes, you can put things online, you can put things on social media, you can respond to stories, and people are voting for months, not months, a month before the election. So it's not like this big, stories published in the newspaper and then they have to wait 24 hours before they can give their response, and then everyone goes to the ballot box the next day. I mean, really, I think at the point that we did that story, probably at least half of voters had already voted. Maybe it was like 45% or something like that. So we had a conversation about that, and we decided that it was still worth it.
Was there a discussion about him telling his story anonymously at any of your outlets? Was that part of this too? His story, you would have told the story anonymously, but other journalists didn't want to do that.
I think that he had been in conversation with other news outlets and was maybe considering telling his story anonymously. Even so, we weren't going to, we would let someone, I guess, bust on that, if that's what you call it, by publishing this anonymous story, even though, we were still not going to publish the story unless he would put his name on it. He has talked to he talked to 10 News before our story was published, and then he talked to them again, I think, after the story was published. So I don't know who the journalists are who he's not talking to, or is like an imaginary person, or whatever the claim may be. Does that answer your question?
On that note, I just wanted to get back to the on-the-camera thing. There's a lot of reasons why people won't go on the camera.
Oh, yeah.
Not necessarily they're lying about who they are, but, I do think, in all sorts of things, not just in relation to this, like, we do need to do, like, there was this guy that was on 40 different news events because he just goes to the breaking news, to the police scene, and, like, stands out there and gives his soundbite that he saw the thing. So yeah, we do need to do more. Right? We do need to do verification on people, but just because somebody won't go on camera, that doesn't mean that he's not who he says he is. Some people don't like to be on camera.
I forgot. Thanks for reminding me. This was clearly a painful story for this kid, and he, had basically after it happened gone into depression for 2 days, went to bed, didn't get out of bed, and then left the state.
Allegedly.
Yes, allegedly. So when he told me the story the first time, and he let me record it, even though he wasn't willing to put his name on it at that point. When he came back and said, you can use my name, I said, can we re-record it? He said, I don't want to tell the story again. And that's understandable to me. I mean, when you listen to him telling the story, it's not a pleasant experience. And I think it was really difficult for him to recount it even the first time.
Can I clarify, if I could just, and maybe you reported this, but did he give you a reason why he decided to go public after not wanting to?
Yeah, I can't remember what was exactly in the
Bosnick outed him on Twitter during your mulling over whether to do it.
Thank you, editor. Yeah, his name was already out there.
She's very good.
Yes. Because Todd Bosnick had tweeted about him. Yeah, during the week.
Thank you.
And then sent his name to a bunch of reporters with the email from Marianne Pintar forwarding Justin's email to Todd, which we included in our story, which then the DeMaio campaign used for as part of their reasoning that he was attached to Todd Bosnick.
Let me ask a question for all of you, and if you want to take part of the next answer and say what you want to say with something. The search warrants that came out after the election shed new light on the campaign, created new news stories after the campaign. Should journalists in this town have pushed harder to get those? Could they have gotten those earlier? How would those have changed the dynamic of the campaign if those details had come out earlier?
Thanks. Again, this was the Watchdog team, but I was familiar. It was fascinating stuff. It was a legal action, so I don't know when the requests were made and how that all transpired. So that's sort of what drove it. I know that I'm sure all news organizations, including ours, tried to get information from the various investigating agencies from the get-go. And would this have changed things? I can't say.